Hi, I'm Jesse Dillon, and this is Jesse's Office. Today we're talking with Army veteran Stacy Bare. Along with his service to our country, Stacy is also a warrior and survivor of PTSD and addiction. Today he guides trauma sufferers to healing and recovery through outdoor wilderness therapy and adventure. We'll touch on topics like brotherhood, patriotisms, the realities of war, returning to society, depression, desperation, suicide, and miraculous breakthroughs to the other side. But first, please click like and also subscribe to my YouTube channel to watch this and more episodes, or subscribe to Jesse's Office wherever you stream your podcasts. Feel free to leave comments and reviews. I try to respond whenever I can. How's it going? How's everything going?
Good. Got back from Africa about 10 days ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Where were you this time?
Botswana in South Africa, talking about elephant conservation and zebras. But it was fascinating to learn the wildlife conflict stuff.
It's terrible.
It's horrific. And then Andrea and I just chatted briefly. It's a lot about refugee elephant populations based off of war.
It's crazy. It seems like people are hell-bent on killing every animal that lives on the earth for some reason.
Well, I think the lifting of the ban so Botswana announced, right, they lifted the moratorium on hunting. Mm-hmm. So
You mean slaughtering?
What?
You mean slaughtering?
Right. So we used to live in Botswana, and my dad had hunted in Botswana for several years before that. So we met up with his old hunting guide, and a lot of the hunting guides are actually against the lifting of the moratorium because it's being done so poorly. They were against the implementation of the moratorium because it was done so poorly.
What was it like to go back there, though? I mean, was this the first? You've been back before.
I've been back, not to Botswana. This is my first time back since 1982.
Whoa.
So it was incredible. I think it factored into this whole kind of journey that Adventure Not War, you know, I intentionally set out on an Adventure Not War to reclaim my narrative and to figure out where I wanted to go. And I didn't realize how much I needed to do that with my own kind of family.
Yeah.
And Botswana has so dominated the narrative in my family, and I've come home and I was, you know how it is, you come home, you have kids, right? You come home and you've been traveling and you've had this like epic experience, but the mechanics of home life kick in, right? And by the time you see your partner at the end of the night, you're like, hey, I love you.
Yeah.
Like, want to watch reruns of The Office?
Yeah.
And go to bed, right?
Wait, I'm looking at you. You're a very tall, for people who are not watching this, very tall, red-headed white man.
Yeah.
Tell me how you started in Botswana. What was how did you even get there?
So my dad was an agriculture professor. He taught at what was then the Botswana Agriculture and is now the Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And so since we've left, Botswana's exploded, right? I mean, there were about maybe 500,000 people, I think, when we lived there, and now there's over 2 million. And the majority of those, which is still really small, right? It's an area the size of Texas and Botswana, but most of that's taken up by the Kalahari and all these, you know, massive game reserves. But Gaborone has changed, or Gabs, or Gaborone, like everybody calls it something slightly different, has dramatically changed. But out by the agriculture college in Sibili, nothing has changed.
Right.
They've added a new campus in 1983, right after we left. The old campus is all still right there. And the neighborhood that we lived in is all there. The only thing that's changed is that what used to be rondavels are now small cinder block huts. But I drove around and took pictures of all these houses and sent them back to my parents, and they're like, that's the one, you know, because it was this tiny little enclave. And it hasn't really changed, and the rest of the country has. And so it's really interesting to be able to go back and see that. But so yeah, and like I had my mom's, you know, like when we moved back to the States, we moved to South Dakota, where my dad was an ag professor at South Dakota State.
How old were you when you went back there?
4, I think 5 by the time we got there.
So do you not have a lot of memories of Botswana?
I have a few, but I don't know how many of those are my own memories or how many of those are memories from all the photographs and slideshows that I saw over the years. But I definitely had some strong sense memories when I was walking around that campus again.
So where is home for you?
Home now is Utah, but I've always felt, I think anywhere you kind of have those first memories in many ways is is a more impactful place than where you were born, in the sense that, right, like you don't necessarily have, I mean, and I grew up in a physically loving family and, had a lot of, so everything in the, lizard part of the brain was fairly well satisfied as a super, super tiny person. But yeah, I mean, every time I go to
where
Africa,
is
it always
home
feels
then? In the heart, where's home?
out in wild spaces.
So in South Dakota, when you grew up, there's a lot of wild spaces in South Dakota.
There really are. There's a lot of open spaces. And when I was growing up there, there was still a fair amount of open prairie and open farmland.
Right.
So at the end of the street where I grew up on used to be prairie grass and then cornfields.
Right.
And so you could just go out from there. I mean, it was a 5-minute, 10-minute walk as a kid.
Did you do that
And
when
all
you
the
were a
time.
kid?
All the time.
So and your family, your existing family, when you were growing up, did you have family in the military?
I did. I didn't have any family when I was growing up active duty military, but we had a really strong military tradition. So my grandpa was in World War II.
Right.
My great aunt was in World War II. My great uncle was in World War II. So I had lots and lots of family in World War II. My dad is from rural West Virginia, so
Right.
understanding that family tree is a little bit more difficult up in the hills and hollers there. But the family story is that the reason they are there is because they were part of Lafayette's troops,
Right.
and they got paid
Well, it
with
goes back
land.
a long way.
Right, and they got paid with land west of the Alleghenies.
So that's your father's family.
Right, but then my mom's side of the family had more of the active military.
Mm-hmm.
That's where, my mom's sister's brother was a Green Beret. His name was Gale, so, I got to grow up with another dude with a girl's name as a pretty strong role model.
Now, did you have growing up, what did honor mean?
That's a really good question. When I was 5 years old, I knew I wanted to be in the military.
Did you have an idea of what you
I
wanted
wanted to
do?
be in the Navy. I wanted to be a Seabee. That's what my grandpa was.
Now, is
Wait.
that a sense of brotherhood or?
I think it was just wanting to be like my grandpa.
Right.
I mean, my grandpa he was funny. He was well-traveled. He, I think, was the first adult that didn't treat me as a kid, even at like 5 years old. He just treated you as you would treat anybody. And he had such a great sense of humor and had traveled the world and created this amazing life for his daughters and his family. And was was first generation American from the Czech Republic, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, very light-skinned Slav. And, I think for him and his family, the military was the Americanizing experience, right?
When you saw him, were there things that you saw in him that you wanted to emulate? Was it like, I want to be like this? Not necessarily in the military, but just like, was he a role model for you?
Yeah, I mean, he died when I was 9, but I mean, I think what I wanted to be was, he was the life of the party. Very engaging, very funny, spoke fluent Czech, spoke English, for a man who only went to commerce college, right, a 2-year business school, and my grandma never had higher education. They were very cosmopolitan. They hosted a lot of families from the Czech Republic in the 80s and never really made statements as to why those families were there. It was just part of the routine
Right.
of our growing up was meeting and seeing these people.
Now, your class, because I assume you went to a small high school, yeah?
I did.
So did everybody there did they all join the military with you?
Not everybody. I was surprised more people didn't. Jenny Kayongo took an Air Force ROTC scholarship, and Jeremy Sopko and Justin Peterson enlisted, and Justin's still in, and I've lost touch with Jenny. And over the years, as we kind of progressed away from high school, more people joined. But it's interesting how when you're living your life and things are happening around it, especially as a high school student going into college, you have a pretty myopic view, right? You're just trying to get through. But I think the statistics of my high school class, we started with about 225. So I thought I was in a big city, which I was for South Dakota.
Right.
And we started with 225, and I think we graduated with 170 or 150. And there were multiple suicides.
Right.
There were multiple vehicle and motorcycle accident deaths. and multiple dropouts for things like teen pregnancies and kids who just, I don't think, could cope with the pain and trauma in their daily lives from abuse, alcoholism, and those things. And that was the 90s. And so I think when I look at that now and I think about where we're at politically in this nation, I still think we've ignored two broad population bases, right? Rural America and what used to be the urban core before massive gentrification and reinvestment.
When did you actually, first of all, when did you join? What year did you join the military, and what was happening politically?
So I joined the military in 1996 with a Reserve Officer Training Cadet Scholarship, or Reserve Officer Training Corps Scholarship at the University of Mississippi. And I remember I was not yet 18, and so I was at the recruiting office, or the office where I was going to sign my contract in Oxford at Ole Miss, and they had to fax. I had to sign a paper, and then they had to fax that to my dad. Right. He signed the paper, and somebody had to be watching him, and he faxed it back. And I think it was one of my dad's very proudest moments, and at the time I was thrilled beyond belief to connect to this long legacy of military service on both sides of my family.
Now, do you remember the first days when you arrived, and was that a shock for you?
Well, where did you go?
Well, I mean, ROTC is a relatively easy process, right? I didn't have to go through basic training in that sense. I did show up to school. I had to come to school a week early, and I flew when TWA was an airline. I flew from Sioux Falls, South Dakota to St. Louis. I wasn't 18, and I remember, but I was a college student. I was out on my own, and I bought a penthouse at the St. Louis airport. Yeah. I was like, finally, I can buy porn. Right. This is like pre-internet, right? So, it's like a big deal. And I remember like just sweating bullets as this, individual, probably some middle-aged lady, was selling me this penthouse and staring at me. What are you doing? And it was like this first kind of real adult act. And my mom found that penthouse later because they came down to the university. And of course, my mom's cleaning my dorm room. It's like, Mom.
Yeah.
And then I was there for a week with nobody else really on campus. And that was really difficult because, I'm thousands of miles away from home. I'm in a completely different culture from South Dakota to Mississippi. I did have somebody tell me that at least I was from the right Dakota. So I'm trying to explain to somebody what that means.
At what point do you go through actual military training? When do you, because you have to go through basic at some point.
Well, you never really go through basic training. It's kind of spread out over the first couple of years of your college. Okay. So pretty quickly, you start doing training. You do physical fitness training every morning from, I think it was 6:30 on, and then I was in this other program called Ranger Challenge, and we did it every day of the week, and I think we started at 6. And it's kind of like the National Guard, one weekend a month, more or less.
So where, just in your journey, does the Neo Confederacy break apart? Does that find out?
I don't know where you are with it.
Yeah, no, I think that begins to break apart well after college. I think, the logic that I used in college was certainly challenged. Oxford's a great place, right? There's a lot of diverse thought, a lot of interesting thought.
Great writers.
Oh, great writers, great music, great food.
Well, how did you get to Oxford? Because that's...
Well, I just wanted to get as far away as I could and try something really, really different. And I had always loved the Civil War growing up. I had picture books and paintings and, there's so much. It was the first war in a way that was really covered in the same way we might understand war being covered today, right? There were dispatches from the battlefield relatively quickly for the time. There were artists on both sides making these quite beautiful drawings. And so growing up, it was very mythic for me. And my father was from West Virginia. And
so is this all the idea of honor and mythology?
Yeah.
It's all rolled together?
Totally. And I think from the Southern perspective...
And when you're in Oxford, are you sort of walking with ghosts every day?
Totally. Feeling that and going to the battlefields that are close by and seeing all those things. But I think even in Oxford, and Mississippi is such a beautiful state, and so many wonderful people in Mississippi, but there's so many contradictions, there's so much tension. Because alongside of that, and kind of being this Neo-Confederate, and trying to understand how I fit in with that, I also had some really amazing friends. This guy, Chase Farmer, who I've sadly lost touch with, And I was realizing I actually have this belt that I had to borrow from him that I still wear. I wear it almost every day that I've had since
He
college.
probably
but
still wants it back.
yeah, he probably does.
Yeah.
I should send it to him.
Yeah.
I think he's a music minister, I think in a Baptist church in his hometown. But Chase loved music, and he loved the rich history of music in the South. And a couple times we went to these old blues bars out in the Delta, right? And we were like the only white dudes walking in there. And what we learned really quickly was if we were there to really learn and hear the music, we were welcomed in. If we were there to look at the scene, we weren't welcome.
Right.
And we got to be a part of some amazing musical history at the end of that really critical era, right? And there's some amazing things happening in the Delta now, which is really great to see as people look to kind of regrow this. But so I think there was a lot of tension in my life, and that broke apart when I got to Sarajevo as part of the United States military in 2003, 2004.
So do you remember going to Sarajevo, your first day in Sarajevo?
Without a doubt, yeah.
And I mean, you talk about you moved from South Dakota to Mississippi. Now you're in Sarajevo. You're just like in another.
And you're during the conflict, right?
Yeah, so I went from Mississippi to Arizona was my first duty station, and that's where I went through my officer basic course as an intelligence officer, military intelligence, right? Oxymoron. I hear that joke all the time. And then I got stationed in Darmstadt, Germany. And that was a really trippy place to be because Darmstadt had been, and Frankfurt, which was just south, had been leveled during World War II. And Darmstadt was also the center of the German Jugendstil movement or the Art Nouveau movement. And then also has had some amazing architectural developments since then. But, 21, I was barely aware of these things. And then...
But is your world starting to open in each successive place?
Right. And I think Mississippi actually really prepared. I ended up studying philosophy. And Dr. Michael Lynch, who's now a professor at the University of Connecticut, was my thesis advisor. And he was really interested he's a metaphysician. He's really interested in what is truth. And he took this really unique position, especially at the time, that said everything is actually truth. Even if you're saying something that's factually incorrect, it's revealing a truth. It's revealing a truth about the individual. It's revealing a truth about a value system. It's revealing a truth about how the world is seen.
So you start with Plato and Aristotle, and you work your way just this gentleman, and
Totally.
and then you're applying those ideas to your officer training,
Right. Yeah, and we had Dr. Michael, I think it was Michael Lawhead. We had such a phenomenal philosophy department. I look back and see who those individuals were and the impact that they've had, and we were so lucky. And so many people were just drawn to Oxford, right? Because Oxford now is really different than the 90s, right? I mean, there are 8,000 students, 8,000 people in the town, and maybe 15,000 total people in the county. And now...
All this time, are you an athlete already?
I mean, I was in the military, right? But I mean, if you saw me try and play intramural basketball, I think people just thought, what a waste of height.
Right.
But I did, when I got to Germany, so then from Arizona, I got stationed in Darmstadt, like I said. I tried playing basketball, coaching basketball there, was walking out one day. I was miserable with basketball. I hated playing it anymore. All the fun of the game had been drained from me. And I saw on the back of this Volkswagen bus a sticker for a rugby club, SC 1880, Sports Club 1880. And so I just wrote a note and said, I'd like to play rugby. Please call me. And a couple weeks later, Bob Connell called me and he said, and I had written it on the back of a grocery list, and he said, all I can get out of this is your phone number and that you need tomatoes. Why'd you put this on my car? And I was like, oh, you're the rugby guy.
Right.
And rugby was a really incredible experience. I got to play for a club in Frankfurt. And during the early 2000s and still today, Frankfurt's not necessarily the best tourist city, but what a great city to live in. What a cosmopolitan international city. And that, and then I think later on being stationed in Bosnia, plus my philosophical training and critical thinking and how to think about things all kind of meshed into really an opening worldview.
So do you remember your first day in Baghdad?
Yeah. So Baghdad's, so I
What's the year?
So I get out of the Army in 2004 without going to Baghdad or Afghanistan. I take up an explosive ordnance disposal job with the Halo Trust.
At this point, have you experienced trauma, or are you still pretty,
I think I have a little bit, right? I mean, there were things in Sarajevo that I think I can now look back on and understand as traumatic experiences. And seeing children having gone through landmine issue, right, losing limbs to landmines.
And you saw, did you experience
Yeah, from a
those things?
distance,
Yeah.
right? And
Now in Sarajevo, you can kind of get on an airplane and leave Sarajevo. Once you get to Baghdad, you're stuck in the conflict.
right. Well, and the thing with, like, my parents came to visit me for Christmas in Sarajevo, right?
Right.
There was a gangland style shooting in the lobby of their hotel the day before.
Right.
But it wasn't a terrorist attack, right?
Right.
And my dad did wander off in Sarajevo and met some local shopkeeper, and my mom and I just left him all day with the shopkeeper, and we walked back in later, and my dad was passed out on the counter, and the guy was asleep on the couch, and the door was wide open. And
Right.
they had a great day together.
Right.
And we picked my dad doesn't speak any Bosnian, and this
Okay.
guy
Yeah.
spoke 50 words of English. And I had a fantastic day. So
Yeah.
that's my dad.
Yeah.
But so I get out, I moved to Angola, then I moved to the former Soviet state of Georgia, and the Army recalls me on my Yahoo email account.
Now, why are you moving to
why?
Georgia? I mean, we've been to Georgia, but what's
Yeah.
Yeah.
not a lot of people go to.
Yeah, Tbilisi's
I mean,
great,
it's
right?
a beautiful
Oh,
city,
it's
but it's
wonderful.
It's hard to cross the
exactly-
street,
it's
though.
not,
It
it's not
is.
exactly
You can get
high on.
fucking killed crossing that street, really.
We walk everywhere, so it's really
Totally.
hard there. But
Yeah.
but I mean, it's not really on everybody's list
Well, I
to
was
move
doing-
to Georgia.
No, totally. Doing landmine clearance. And
okay. So you moved there to work.
yeah, in Abkhazia, which is
Right,
in the northwest
okay.
corner. And I met two individuals who I'm still fairly close with at this like weird 4th of July concert that the American Embassy put on at Tbilisi. And it was 2005, 4th of July 2005, and Luther Vandross had died.
Right.
And there was this, my friend Miko Kakidze and my friend Jonathan. I didn't know them at the time. I just went to this thing by myself. And there are these two drunk guys shouting about Luther Vandross.
Right.
And I, too, am a Luther Vandross fan. And so that ended up being kind of my friend group whenever I was able to go down to Tbilisi. And Miko, I mean, Jonathan was at my wedding. Miko and I are planning an expedition for next year
Now,
at some point.
Well, let's
Did-
get to
did-
anyway,
Baghdad. I want to get
So
Did alcohol start to play a role there, or does it?
I'd been
not
drinking
really?
pretty heavily. I took about a year and a half off from alcohol during my time in Mississippi, but I did have my first drug overdose in Mississippi, or
Can
significant.
I ask you what kind of
issue.
drug were you doing?
I mean, it was basically if it was like a bowl of pills that was like a bowl of Skittles for a Halloween party,
Right.
Uppers and downers, and
So it was accidental.
I mean, it was intentional, shoving them all in my mouth,
Right.
but it was
Yeah.
accidental in the sense that I wasn't trying to kill myself or anything
Right.
else like that.
Right,
but
right.
it led to about a 48 to 72 hour period where I was paralyzed on a couch.
Oh, geez.
Did
and
you-
I had
did you go to the
waking
hospital or
disorders.
no?
No. I soiled myself several times over, had visions, met Jesus, actually met Jesus during that time frame. And
Did he impart any wisdom to you that you
Or
could use
she?
in
Or
your?
we don't know. What?
no, I mean, I ended up being, I was a Southern Baptist. I became a Southern Baptist. I was a born again Christian. And I'm really thankful for a lot of the people I met in that period of life. Two men specifically, Bill McKenzie and Keith Kading, who are very deep and profound lay leaders. Keith in the Baptist church and Bill in the Episcopal church.
So you still have that philosophy background, but you're relating it more to Luther or to the Reformation of the
Right.
church and
Yeah.
trying to put all the belief and
Totally.
organize these beliefs together.
Yeah, and looking at the Reformed faith, and
Right.
and I think I've always been. I can highlight that I've always been a religious seeker and a spiritual seeker. But so fast forwarding to Abkhazia, I get recalled. I go back to North Carolina, have some other adventures between leaving Abkhazia and getting to North Carolina, and then I get to Baghdad right after Easter of 2006.
Now, in landing in Baghdad, does it feel like this is different? This is
Oh,
a
yeah.
different thing that you're dealing
Were you
with?
scared?
Yeah.
And do you where
Yeah.
do you meet Chuck right there when you land, or do you? And can you
I
tell
think
us
the
who?
second.
can
I
you-
think the
can you tell
second
us who
day I meet
is
Chuck.
and-
I think the second day, maybe the first day I met Chuck. But yeah, I mean, when I got recalled to Baghdad, I actually felt a profound sense of relief. And if you haven't been in the military, I think it's hard to understand that. I mean, I loved the life I was leading. I loved, landmine clearance is about the most objective good you can get. There is still some subjectivity there, but it was a very objective good. I was working with great people, but I felt like I had missed my generation's war, right? And my father, who had been medically disqualified for Vietnam, I always felt had a sense of grief that he didn't serve, that he didn't have the chance to serve. And I think one of the things that pulls people into the military experience is that regardless of whether you think the opportunity, or the experience of war is a just war, you still are drawn to serve at some level.
And who are you serving?
Well, so Eric Remarque, it's the only war book you ever need to read, All Quiet on the Western Front.
Right.
You're serving the men and women to your left and to your right.
So it's not even the United States at that point, right?
It really isn't. And I think that's the trap we get into, is that when we come home or when we have moments to think about it, then we think, oh, this was for my country. This was for, we create these broader ideals. But I think at some level, and I joined the military for the United States, right? I wanted to serve. I wanted to be a patriot. I wanted to be proud. And I am proud of my service. And I'm proud of the service of the men and women around me. And I think many of those men and women have gone on to make significant impacts in their communities and take that level of service to continue it and believe strongly in this idea of the United States, even if I don't agree with their political opinions then or now. But when you are there and you are moving away from mortar fire, or when you are responding to a sniper on the street, or when you are responding to an IED, you don't think, fuck yeah, America. You think, I need to make sure that Staff Sergeant Church and Sergeant Miller and whoever else is in that unit are going to get out safely.
So who's in charge then? Mattis? Is it Mattis' time?
It was Petraeus.
Petraeus. So
Before that, who was that ID? I can see the big, tall fourth ID
The thing
commander.
is,
but then Petraeus.
He's counter...
Casey was first, and then Petraeus. So I was there before and then during the surge.
Really has a counterinsurgency sort of vibe to what he's thinking about. So,
loved working for General Petraeus.
So is everybody who's there on mission with that thing, and are you going out into the streets, and how's it getting down to the level of actually fighting the war? Yeah.
So there's no easy way to describe the Iraq war, right? Because we went in there, weapons of mass destruction, right? No weapons of mass destruction. I remember thinking to myself, are we going to at least plant a few? And I remember knocking on this. I was a civil affairs officer. So my team's job was to nominally win the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people in Western Baghdad, and later specifically the Kadhimiya neighborhood.
So this is the counterinsurgency sort of strategy. Now, the thing is that how much fear is there in walking those streets? Because you don't know what that door you're knocking on is.
Totally.
And you may not get shot that day, but you're still dealing with an overwhelming level of fear in those every time you leave the base.
Yeah, you kind of get numb to it a little bit. The fear comes in the morning and at night, right?
Can you sleep? Do you sleep through the night?
Of course.
But that's
what do you mean?
I was physically exhausted at the end of every day.
But the thing is that whether it comes in the beginning or it comes at the end of the night, it's total trauma. I mean, it's just
and different people will think about it differently, right? But I'm a pretty visceral guy. Like, what's really I was just having this conversation with my wife. My wife doesn't visualize things. So if she's thinking about me now, she's thinking about the idea of me, but she doesn't picture me in her mind in the way that a lot of other people would picture things.
I can imagine that leads to a lot of trouble.
Right. But I'm the other way. Like, my life kind of I think of things. Frank Miller had a huge influence on me as a kid, the cartoonist.
Yep, comic books.
Comic books. And my head kind of operates like a Frank Miller graphic novel, for better or for worse. And so I think sometimes I can spiral down, or I can see a potential storyline in my own life through that. And so there was a lot of that fear and trauma. And I would put myself, for what we saw in combat, because we weren't going out at night kicking down doors for the most part, right? We were walking around during the day trying to figure out, our sewage system's working? Are schools getting the tests they need? Do we need to build new schools? What is happening in women's enterprise? So I would say I was somewhere in the middle percentile of what people would see, if not a little bit lower than that. But we still got blown up. We got shot at, everything else like that. And I remember towards the end of my tour in Baghdad, we got blown up. And
what does that mean? Wait.
An IED hit our truck. And we missed, that IED missed us by inches. It hit the front of the truck, shredded the tire, screwed the engine up pretty well, but everybody in the truck ended up being fine. We got to the meeting we were going to.
Wait, you kept
a
going?
little bit late. Yeah, we did. We moved through the ambush site. I remember seeing a man get hit perfectly with 3 50 caliber rounds from one of the turrets, and it perforated him and cut him straight in half. One bullet hit a hip joint, one bullet hit right in the middle and likely severed his spine, and the other 50 caliber hit the other hip joint. It was just like a movie, right? And combat is not at all like the movies typically, and his body was just cut in half, and we continued to move. And later, when I first tried to get the VA to acknowledge that I had PTSD, you had to write down the name, rank, and serial number of the U.S. service member that was killed. You were not allowed to have post-traumatic stress disorders or post-traumatic stress at all from seeing an Iraqi get killed. The othering was complete.
You know, it's like later you're going to return, but while you're there, you know, because you're dealing with a lot of these civil issues, you know, of the of what, you know, how to keep the city going. Do you see people as other then, or do you are you empathetic to them? Your philosophy training, your religious training, you know, each person's a soul. You know, it's like, how do you?
I mean, I thought I wrote quite a bit to Bill at that time, and had some correspondence with Keith, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier, and both of these gentlemen are incredibly compassionate individuals, and like I said, I mean, a lot of credit to these men for my religious, spiritual, and intellectual training. And I should also point out I was in high school debate, and I had some amazing coaches there, and I think that's why I gravitated towards philosophy. Judy Kroll and Sally Pease, Mitch Gafford, Doug Cheddar.
How do you remember all these names of all? I don't remember anybody's names.
Me neither.
Serious.
That's, I guess, why I was an intelligence analyst. So you know, I think the hardest part for me, and it is one of the challenges, I think, in the Middle East, when you have women in full burqas and covered, it's difficult to see them as human in the way that we're trained to see humanity in the West. And oftentimes maybe similar in even with the men in the culture, because so much of the men are in uniform dress all the time, and for good reason, right? I mean, it's super hot.
Sure.
You shouldn't use water to shave your beard, right?
Yep.
Historically. And a long, white, open, flowing gown is a lot cooler. But when all you see is the face, I think it can be challenging at times to see individuals within that. And so the way we're trained in humanity and just or inculcated, or our culture sees humanity, we're so used to seeing people in different things. I walked in and I'm wearing a blue shirt. You're wearing I mean, there's like 6 people today wearing blue, and I was like, oh, it's like Blue Wednesday, and then, but you know, but I remember thinking often, how am I being perceived here? Because we all look the same by design, right? When I'm 6'7", I weighed about 300 pounds or more when I was in Baghdad before I put any gear on. My chest plate barely covered my chest and my back, so I'm bulging out of body armor. I have an M4 with a collapsible stock. I collapse the stock. I've got my sidearm. I have maybe a couple smoke grenades. I have, you know, a helmet, gloves, sunglasses, and I'm here to help.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when I was leaving, this sheikh that we worked with, who also threw us a Christmas party, and they sang Christmas carols. It was in a fairly poor neighborhood, very, very poor neighborhood with minimal resources. And for Christmas carols, they sang us Happy Birthday, Jesus, because they knew that Christmas was a birthday.
That's them taking a step across the street.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a
know?
doubt. It was
They
very
probably
warm.
had to find a book to memorize it because they probably
wanna-
don't even know the song.
Right,
But did you ever use your firearm while you were there?
I never did.
Yeah.
I want to go back to one thing though. What is the moment, or is there a moment where you realize that's a person, it doesn't matter where they're from, that was just killed in front of me? Is there a moment you can remember?
There's a moment that I can remember, I think, around, so there are 2 or 3 times where I was hyper aware of humanity. And that's not to say that there weren't other times. It's like even friends of mine that were killed, American and Iraqi, certain deaths stick with you in a way that other deaths don't. So when Lieutenant Colonel Dan Holland died on a veterinary mission, he was a veterinarian. I was supposed to be on that mission, but because I wanted to go, I assigned that mission. I told people where to go, and they're like, no, we need you here for a briefing. In his truck, and he and 4 other American service members were obliterated with roadside IEDs that were planted, and improvised explosive devices that were planted underneath the vehicle. And I was close during my time in Iraq with the sergeant who was behind that vehicle. And he said, we were driving along, there was a loud noise, and then there was nothing left of the vehicle. And that death, even though I wasn't there and didn't witness it, and the deaths of people like Shane Mahaffey and Nate Vacco and Brian, even though I wasn't there for those deaths stuck with me in a way that the death of when I was in an office next to a Navy EOD squadron, and there were 2 guys and they were training. One was training the other one, and something went wrong, and a mortar, I believe, exploded. And I was the first responder, and I saw the remains of the first body, and I saw and was the first responder and helped to stop the bleeding of the individual who was behind, who was trying to do the training. And though that is the most visceral death that I was able to witness, or the immediate after impacts, that death hasn't necessarily bothered me as much as some of the others. Or like I saw one of my first patrols, I remember we saw these street dogs, and they were so happy, and they were eating something, and they were so happy. And the wind blew, and trash moved, and these dogs were eating the neck out of a bloated, dead Iraqi man. And for years, if you touched my neck while I was sleeping, I would swing. And for years, I had dreams where I was trying to tell the dogs that were eating my neck to stop eating my neck. And so it's some of those things. It's weird what sticks with you and what doesn't. But that moment of humanity, one of the ones, I was recognized by an Iraqi man at the agriculture college because he had had my father as a professor when my dad was at the University of Nebraska. And he said, "You're Tom Bare's son." I was like, "How do you know that? You don't see my name or anything?" He's like, "You look just like he did when he was your age."
Wow.
And so that was trippy.
That was in Iraq.
That was in Iraq. And so I was like, "Whoa, you're a person.
Yeah.
I know exactly where you've been. I can picture your life with my dad at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln." And there was another moment where I knocked on the door. We were doing some sort of a check, and there's not a lot of physical contact when you're in Iraq, right? And I didn't really realize how much I missed that till I got home. Yeah, you're hugging your your other buddies and stuff, but it's through layers, right? And you don't really see women typically.
Right.
And I remember knocking on this door, and this woman opens the door, and she has the most beautiful face. And she says, "Are you here for the weapons of mass destruction?" with a flawless, upper scale British accent.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yes, where are they?" And she's like, "We keep them in the basement and the orphans on top to hide them. Would you like to take a look?" Right. And there's this moment, for whatever reason, this lady just had enough, right, of American, and I don't blame her for having enough of American troops. I would have had enough of American troops. I mean, you know, oftentimes we were getting shot at or whatever, and people are like, "Oh, they hate the American life." They don't hate the American life. we would capture guys, and they'd want to talk to us. Who are the Yankees? What's New York like? I want to go to Chicago. I'd like to go to LA. But we're driving tanks, right? Not me, but the Americans are driving tanks around on these roads. The sewage pipes aren't built like they are in the U.S. They're close to the surface. Sewage is leaking up, pouring into the streets. There's shit in the streets. And this is a culture that the public space is the street corners. And we have just filled their street corners full of shit.
Right.
You would shoot at whoever's doing that too, right?
Yeah.
So, but I remember meeting her, and she was so, and I could have, with any justification, all the justification that was given me is the fucking sheriff in that town. I could have cuffed her. I could have been like that. But instead, we just sat and had this like snarky comment, back and forth. And her face and the people that were there and that we're working with stuck with me. But we also had these amazing interpreters, Ronnie and Mark. They took anglicized names. And they helped consistently remind us that there were real people there. And most of the people in Iraq, just like most of the people in the United States, are good people trying to preserve their self-interest.
So you've been back many times. Did you ever see that woman again?
No. I've never been back to Baghdad. I've been back to Iraq, but I haven't gone back to Baghdad.
So your tour ends, and do you at that point? Well, first of all, are you drinking a lot at that point?
How are you dealing with this? And how are you getting? What are you doing there?
Well, I'm not really drinking in Baghdad, right? We had a couple times where I don't want to ruin this for future troops. So I won't say
you're not allowed
that.
to drink there. I mean, there's
right.
no right.
So I won't say how we got our booze.
Oh boy!
But we found our booze from time to time, and
but you don't have a substance problem while you're there.
Not really there.
So do you think? Are you when you're getting on that plane to come home? Are you sort of like everything's cool, great, that was cool, I'm going back, everything's going to be great?
Totally.
So when does it start to? When do you start to feel these darker thoughts? And is the root of it guilt that you didn't give enough? Is it there's
a lot of things, right? I mean, I think there are life in America, even in the 80s for a middle class kid, can be really traumatic, right? Even with all the privilege, and we're seeing that play out now with rates of suicide of my cohort and the cohort that's 10 to 15 years older than me, specifically white males.
But is your problem trauma at that point? Is it because where do you?
I think my biggest issue. I always wonder what Stacy Bare of 2007 would say about Stacy Bare of today, right? And I think sometimes Stacy Bare of 2007 would try and call bullshit on me. But you have all these different experiences, and I'm now on the other side of it and looking back. And I think somewhere, I started using cocaine when I was on leave periods during the Halo Trust, and it was just fun, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing that I really felt when I came back was I had missed a year of life. I had missed a year of friends dying, getting married, babies being born, dating, all these things. I had missed that. And I remember thinking to myself, I loved Dead Poets Society as a kid, right? I loved that movie. And I was like, I'm going to suck the marrow from the bones of life. Mm-hmm. And I am going to live it 150. I'm going to live it as hard as I can every day that I can. I have to make up for a year. Not only do I have to make up for a year, but I realized that the life I'd been living before wasn't full enough.
So are you jumping into that world? Is it because
totally.
So it's not necessarily the veteran thing. It's I got to make up
Grab
for
onto
lost
life.
time.
Right.
Yeah. I got to make up for lost time. And I'm gonna be out there. I'm gonna be the supernova. I'm gonna burn as bright as I can.
Right.
And better to flare out than fade away.
There was a future in front of you, or I'm gonna burn as bright as I can and then flame out? Or where's PTSD in all of this? How does that?
I think there's adjustment disorder in all this. It is a start. I don't think the trauma really begins until later. I mean, one of the ways, you've all flown out of LaGuardia, right? Mm-hmm. Like worst airport in the world.
Sure. That's very traumatic.
Making light of trauma, but
totally.
It's terrible.
But there's that person carrier, like you get on that thing and it's always too hot and it just slowly goes across that. So the easiest way I can describe it is that at the time I was instead of taking that thing to the terminal, I jumped into a Corvette. I drank as much, and I drove as fast and as crazy as I could to get to the other side. And if you look back on it now, we can all identify that as dangerous behavior influenced by trauma and influenced by significant issues around adjustment. But had I tried to get on that LaGuardia-style people mover and move through that process slowly, I would have killed somebody.
So
So-
when does the darkness seep in, and how do you call Chuck out of all of this? Like,
So-
Chuck's been, did he come back at the same time?
Yeah, so Chuck was there as a contractor. So I think where the darkness begins to seep in, the moment that I really remember, again, visceral nightmares and feeling like I had I felt like I was abandoning people when I left. I tried to extend in Baghdad. My whole team tried to extend.
Who were you abandoning?
I was abandoning troops. I was abandoning fellow soldiers. I was abandoning Jimmy P. and Jay Hardy and Patrick Kucharabi.
And
I was
what about
abandoning
your
these guys.
translators? Oh, how about any of the Iraqis?
Without a doubt, abandoning those guys, abandoning the
but-
Iraqi people that we worked with, abandoning that lady that I was talking about.
But a lot of people start to come back. I mean, do you remember great parties and then horrible descent?
Never went to so what it was, the moment that I really struggled with it, and it weirdly enough goes back to that first overdose in Mississippi, is I had severe back pain. And I went to the University of Pennsylvania health system, and I was diagnosed with severe back pain, and I got oxycodone.
Yeah.
And
Boy,
we
that's
had been
going around.
right, and we had been given like basically brown paper baggies of Vicodin and oxy in the military, right? I mean, you can get whatever you want, right? And it wasn't necessarily prescribed; it was like pushed across in brown paper bags, and you just pop that shit all the time.
Right.
And I had taken one or two of them, and had paralyzed myself again on the bed.
So you had overdosed.
This is later.
This is at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm passed out in a dark room, and like things were a little fucked up, right? Like my apartment had a room with no windows in it, and that's where I lived. And I closed the door, and it was complete and total blackness, and there was enough room in there for a bed and an alarm clock on the floor, so I didn't have to look at the alarm clock, and I could roll off the bed and feel like I was as safe as I possibly could be. And that's where I lived, and that's how I lived. So I'm beginning, even at that point, intellectually, I know I'm a little messed up. I'm super jumpy, right? I'm still super jumpy. People used to enjoy sneaking up on me to watch me like lose my shit. And then I would have to like calm down.
I don't know that those were real friends.
Yeah.
No, they weren't. So that moment where, and then eventually what ends up happening with a lot of the cocaine use over the next couple of years, but that's the first moment that I realized, like, you know, I'm having this waking dream, dogs eating my neck. We had this young girl on one of my last patrol in Baghdad. A young girl had burns on about 90% of her body. They weren't on her head, they weren't on her ankles, and they weren't on her wrists. So what does that tell you? And she had been wrapped in gauze. The gauze had not been properly cleaned. The wound had not been properly lubricated. The skin underneath the gauze was necrotizing, and skin was growing over the gauze. And we began to tear the gauze off of her. And her fathers and uncles were prepared to kill us because they thought we were killing her. I doubt that girl made it, right? Because we would have had to pull the gauze, scrub the wounds. I mean, anyway. So I thought I was that girl at that time. And I started using the cocaine because cocaine's a shit ton of fun, and it allows you to drink more. But then what was happening was I was having more of these waking nightmares because my body was physically no longer able to move because of the drugs or because of the alcohol that I had consumed. So my body couldn't move anymore. But because of the cocaine I had consumed, I couldn't fall asleep.
So like, at what point do you say I give up?
Yeah, what's hitting
and
bar?
also, you know, where is your faith in all of this? Because it's like, you know, you're spiraling down, and
My faith is pretty well gone at this point, right?
Okay, so
because people say things like, everything happens for a reason. And I'm like, tell that to Brian's family. Fuck you.
Right.
Everything happens for a reason.
So Chuck asked you to come.
So I end up finishing Penn. I get a job in Colorado. I tell Chuck, who lives down in Colorado, I actually haven't talked to Chuck in a couple of years right now, and that's kind of, I mean, there's probably reasons for that, and I need to call him, but he's living in Colorado Springs. I'm living in Boulder. He's like, dude, we got to get together. I start calling him. I'm miserable in Boulder, right? Because in the military, I knew what I was supposed to do. In graduate school, as fucked up as I was, I had an immediate task in front of me, graduate, right? And I love design, right? I mean, that's the great thing. Like, I had this amazing creative outlet.
Right.
And honestly, some of my instructors and my classmates were just amazing people. David Guvner and Oscar Grauer, two amazing Venezuelan landscape architects and urban designers.
But you really have total recall.
I mean,
of
the
names of
name
people
thing
that you
is
worked
like
with.
a phenomenon.
I'm
I think.
still really close with these guys. I love these guys. I got to go to Venezuela with these guys. And then a lot of my classmates were just fantastic people, just very caring and empathetic.
The fear is consuming you at
The
this
fear is
point.
consuming. I'm out to Boulder, Colorado. I don't know what I'm doing.
Are you still using heavily?
I'm still using a lot of cocaine, but now I'm binging on cocaine because I realize, like, if I use cocaine regularly, I'm going to have these visceral waking dreams, and that's fucked up. So I just use cocaine, like, at this point, I binge. The last time I used cocaine was 2010 at the Calgary Stampede. 2010 at the Calgary Stampede. Great party, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a great party without cocaine, too.
Right. But maybe not as good.
Maybe not as, I don't know.
Anyway, but Chuck.
But I do love outlaw country as well, you know?
yeah.
So, like, these are also, like, again, this is one of the other things that kind of flips into that, right? Like, I'm in Mississippi, I get this great music education, I start listening to these guys, Johnny Cash, Bastard Sons of Johnny Cash,
Yeah.
you know, Bobby Bare, got the same last name as me, we've got to be related, like
Right.
Billy Joe Shaver. And there's something, I think, by the time that I get out and I start using cocaine, and I'm like, well, these guys did it, and they're like my heroes, right?
Right. That's
And
a
then you
problem.
realize, like, how miserable their lives were.
Yep.
Like,
So-
Waylon Jennings was not a happy man.
Sure. So
But-
there comes a day that's the worst day.
Yeah, in Colorado, and I call him, and I'm complaining about things again, and you know, I want to rejoin, or I want to commit suicide. Like, I don't know what to do. And Chuck being Chuck is a tall, lanky dude, redheaded guy, and he's like, just put off. You know what, man? We got to do something. Like, let's go climb. I can take off a couple days. Let's go climb. And you know, the thought is basically like, if you're going to commit suicide, if you're going to die by suicide, it doesn't really matter if it's today or 10 days from now.
He said that to you?
No, I did. I said it to myself. I can put it off. He did say, like, put it off. Like, let's make a decision. Put it off, you know? And so I was like, all right. Because at that point, I have nothing left to lose.
Now, is he saying that to you because he just wants you to put it off? And you know, like, what's his frame of mind when he's telling
His
you?
frame of mind is, you have a lot to contribute to the world. You're a friend. I think you're a great guy. And I think you should keep living.
So you come to the mountain, and it's the morning of the mountain, and you can't think about all this Baghdad and Yugoslavia
Well, maybe
and,
you do.
all this other stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
we
you
were
have to-
talking about Baghdad on the way up, right? But I mean, more than anything, I was just excited about being there, and I hadn't really fully taken advantage. You know, I'd been out, I think my buddy Jeff Knowles, who was a buddy of mine from graduate school, came out to visit, and we had gone and climbed a 14er. And at this point, I had met the woman who later, you know, who's now my wife. She's amazing. So there's a couple other things that are like little supports,
Yeah.
but not
you know,
strong, not a foundation yet.
But the mountain, in a sense, can be its own church. So
Oh, without a doubt.
So what happens? Do you have an awakening on this trip that brings you back to your faith? Is it a gradual thing? Is it immediate?
It was pretty immediate in that, like, because climbing, you know, I have a body built for rugby, not a body built for gravity sports, and certainly not climbing. At 6'7", still weighed about 285, 290 pounds. I'd lost a little bit of weight, but not much at that point. The first Flatiron is a very friction-focused climb, so there's not a lot of, like, hand grabs or anything. It's, you know, smearing your hands, smearing your feet.
Yeah.
And, I was just pulled into the moment completely. I was scared. I was nervous. Take the rope. Chuck's like, just relax. And then we get up, and and so it was. And then I've talked a lot about in different times the rappel off the backside. I had this massive, what I now know is a somatic experience. Right, I'm shaking. I'm trembling. My body is physically flushing a lot of the trauma out that has been contained and growing and metastasizing and in many ways rotting for 2+ years at this point. And so I think that moment of release and in a way, ecstasy was the moment. I mean, and it was the climbing up there that got me there. And it was the realization that I hadn't thought all day about suicide. I hadn't thought all day about guilt. I hadn't thought all day about fear. And then you immediately, once you realize that, you're like, shit, should I be guilty? Should I be afraid?
Right.
Why am I not afraid? Why am I not guilty? And it's because I had that space. And it's one of the reasons that I think drinking later on becomes so hard to quit for so many people, because so much space in your life is taken up by trauma or by alcohol or whatever. And all of a sudden, you have to figure out what to do with that time and that energy.
So is that mountain, is it a meditation, that climb? Is it, what is the transformation that happens there? And how important is it that you continue to climb? Because the trauma doesn't go away. I mean, if you don't keep working at it,
totally,
this could happen. So what is it that you're getting from the natural world that is pushing you forward?
I think I'm getting a few things. The first thing I'm getting is, because of the combination of physical and beauty, is I'm so pulled into the moment that I am, and now looking at like mindfulness and, becoming one with your breath, because I'm so worried about making it up and not falling, I'm one with the mountain, right? Yeah. I didn't make that metaphorical jump then. I was just like, I'm just, because I remember almost immediately responding back into kind of this like, well, that was cool. I wasn't that scared. I'm tough. I'm good. But I think when I look back on it, I realized it was that oneness, right? It was that wholeness. It was that connectedness to this broader world. In mountaineering later, really beginning to understand, or at the top of the mountain or at the top of the climb, having these moments that I now know are moments of awe. And I think, and it really is that connectedness, right? And one of the great things with climbing is I'm connected to Chuck.
Yeah.
Right.
Physically connected to Chuck.
Yeah.
He's holding me.
Yeah.
Now, do you build a new tribe up on that mountain? Because you met your wife out there. Is the mountain part of that? And does
mountain
it bring you back to some spiritual sense that you can your faith comes back to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the mountain culture, the people you meet, first working with veterans, then really beginning to learn that non-veterans have trauma and challenges that they're overcoming, and meeting people there and recognizing I'm not alone in this. Veterans aren't alone in this. Meeting older veterans, Stacy Bare, Robert Himber, and then for the non-veterans, Vijay Viswanthan was one of the first guys who he's a paraplegic, incredible individual, incredible spirit. Had the world going for him. Rappelled out of dorms at CU Boulder and broke his back. And what he's, Sean O'Neill, like I said, Luis Benitez, and others who've like shown me these worlds that are possible. And I think, I did dive back into the spirituality of it and wondering, and I mean, there is, in all of our sacred texts, in humanity's sacred texts, wilderness and oftentimes mountains play a really specific role, right? I mean,
The metaphor.
I mean, Moses goes up the mountain, right?
Yep.
Jesus is in the desert and in a high place. Muhammad is in caves. Buddha's under a tree. Like, look at where most Orthodox churches are. Like, they're in these high places.
We're
like,
trying
how
to
did
get
they
up there.
Yeah.
So how long after you have that experience do you decide to bring others to that experience?
Immediately.
What do you see in their faces when they experience the mountain the first time? And is that an important component?
Yeah. I think I realize I see myself. And so, I mean, the process is really selfish at the start, right? But I think if I have one regret about that time frame is that I would have spent more time doing the thing versus organizing the thing for others. I think I would have vastly improved my healing process and been a more impactful leader in the outdoors.
I have a question. That moment, that first climb, you talked about you were suicidal, but then you're afraid for your life. Is there something in that moment where you think, I don't want to die. I want to be here. When you're afraid, when you're climbing with Chuck, or you're rappelling or whatever. Is there a moment? Because for the people out there that don't believe that there is anything in the next moment, was there something that happened to you where you were grateful that you were afraid of dying? In other words, that shake you up?
No one has ever asked me that before. And I've been talking about that experience for several years now. I think that's a really great point. Unconsciously, I must have had that thought because I remember definitely not wanting to fall and not wanting to be dashed on jagged rocks below. And all the years of thinking about this, I've never thought about that. But maybe that's one of the things that subconsciously I really understood was I want to live.
You know, does it at the end of that experience?
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Do you feel like you've met your tribe, you've met a community, and
Yeah.
you're doing the work you're supposed to be doing now?
Yeah, I mean, and even that has since changed, right? I'm beginning to understand what that work looks like and how you move through those things. But I was thinking about this morning. I was texting back and forth with Dacker Keltner, who we've done a lot of the research with, who, you know, if we move forward with the work we're doing, he'll be one of the scientific advisors. He's a neuropsychologist and just a hilarious dude, really great guy. And we were texting back and forth. He's in the Alps right now, climbing around, and about what the power of the outdoors is. And we, in scientific terms, have looked at it from, you know, the viewpoint of awe as the active ingredient. But I think one of the things that's most important, and now I'm definitely going to be thinking about that, right? Like, so I wanted to live. Why didn't I fall? If I was so suicidal, why didn't I just let myself fall? I wanted to live. I found deep, maybe even within my lizard brain, that I wanted to live. And one of the things around that is that the outdoors, I think, opens you up or can open you up. And it's almost most powerful as a catalyst in showing you what the world can be. Not what the world has to be or is, but what the world can be. And so you open up to these massive opportunities and possibilities. And I think in that, you find other people who maybe aren't doing things the same way you would do things in the outdoors, but you're drawn to them because they see possibilities and they see horizons that nobody else can see. And so last night, there's a young, amazing adventurer. I think he's going to be one of the greatest adventurers of his generation. He's 28 years old. His name's Anthony Mara. He doesn't really write books or articles. He doesn't take photos. He doesn't take videos. He is out there in the truest sense of the world. Very Everett Russian without the writing, probably a little bit more stable. And so we haven't seen each other. He was on this big 6-month journey. He came home. He started working again. I have a kid. I was on my own expeditions. We hadn't met up. We've been trying to meet up. So last night, he gave me the ride to the airport. And I think about what Anthony is doing, and I was telling him, like, man, I'm so stoked for you. I'm so excited. I wish I could do some of that stuff. And I was like, but, you know, my time to do that is different. And Anthony said, we just have different styles. That's all. And it's so true. I don't have the same style or resources or time for the style he has, but he doesn't have the same resources or time for the style that I have. But we can see in each other that we're both creating these possibilities and these worlds that we want to create and see. And even though I'm not Anth and I'm not doing the things that he's doing and never had those dreams, we're still able to impact each other's livelihood and engagement with the world because, you know, for whatever reason, and it's really humbling to think of this, Anthony sees me creating worlds that he didn't think were possible. And I see worlds that he's creating that I didn't think were possible. And I think even more so than all the physical benefits, the cortisol levels, the decreasing in inflammation effects, the lessening of constriction of arteries, all these things that we know happen when we're in the outdoors, I think the most powerful thing that happens and why we're drawn to other people in the outdoors is this belief that there's a better world, a different world that's possible. And when I've been talking to friends who've climbed in Iran recently, and they're like, look, you get to Iran, and the mountain culture is the same around the world. People are excited about creating the possibilities in the world you can be. And I saw that in Iraq. I saw that in Afghanistan. We had mullahs in Afghanistan telling us before skiing, nobody liked winter. Now, even those of us who are too old to ski, we so look forward to winter because of the joy that it brings our children.
Right.
And that is that possibility, I think. And that's why you get drawn into it. And mountain people is also kind of, I don't want to leave. There's amazing adventures on the prairies and rivers and elsewhere and in towns and everything else like that. But it's just that ability, I think. And that's where that connection to group looks like, right?
Thank you so much.
You're going to have
so
to come
great.
back
Yeah.
another time because we have lots of other things to talk to
Thank
you
you.
about.
Yeah.
No, that was
great.
you just blew my mind.
Good.
Nobody has ever asked that question.
Okay.
Nice.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so open and honest
Yeah.
and vulnerable. Thank you.
Thanks for watching or listening. Don't forget to subscribe. Click here for the next episode.
Here.